Today called Today's Civil Rights Movement. I am Professor Katie Rose Haight-Monick. I'm in the Anthropology Department and in the Children and Youth Studies program. And I was asked by a former / current student, Audrey Peterson, to moderate today's panel, which I'm so excited to do. So I was asked to introduce myself and a little bit about my background in civil rights before I introduce the moderators, and then we will open it up for their to present themselves a little bit and then open it up for discussion. I have some questions to help out, but hopefully this is much more of a dialogue and conversation than it is me leading or discussing anything. So I will be here to help facilitate if we need a microphone, but really it's our esteemed pleasure to have our panelists here today. So I am a cultural anthropologist who studies race in the United States. I also study psychiatry. So my work on civil rights comes from an engaged anthropological perspective that really questions systems of oppression that incarcerate and stigmatize young people in the mental health system. I lived in a mental institution for 1.5 years to understand what it's like for mostly young black and brown children to come of age within a system that tells them that they're wrong and that they're bad, and to figure out ways to help to make them change. Oftentimes this includes a lot of psychopharmacology and intensive behavior management. And what I found in my ethnographic study was that despite this really constraining and coercive system, there was a little bit of what I call give in the system that organized itself through the relationships that these boys and girls developed with the important mentors in their lives, as well as the relationships of friendship that they built with the other young people in the system. And they talked about it as love. So I'm a scientist who looks at how love is used to combat systems of oppression. Sometimes in just very intimate ways, but those ways can have resounding effects as these young men and women who have been completely kicked out of society and told that they're not welcome, as they make their way as adults back into it. And so thinking about systems of love and strategies of relationship building that help and provide avenues for people to fight against these systems of oppression. And so that's part of, I think, why Audrey asked me to come talk about that, as well as my activism in teaching is to help my students peer behind the curtain of the ideologies that we speak about, to look at how we can actually see the truth of what's happening, to raise our own consciousness so that we can maybe do something about it. And so I spend a lot of time teaching and raising consciousness, but I don't have a lot of skills or talents in helping people move from the academy into the real world. So hence we are very fortunate today to have a panel of activists and leaders who do that. So let me first introduce briefly and then allow them to introduce themselves. So first is Daniel Greenberg. He is a former distinguished visitor at NYU School of Law. He served for 10 years as the president and attorney-in-chief for the Legal Aid Society in New York City. He was the co-lead counsel on McWaters versus FEMA, a class action lawsuit on behalf of victims of Hurricane Katrina. He also speaks frequently on policy matters relating to the poor and the means by which legal services are provided to them. To his right, we have Norman Siegel, class of '65. He is a leading civil rights attorney and civil liberties lawyer, former president of the NYACLU from 1985 to 2000. He's worked on cases challenging the systemic exclusion of African Americans and women from jury pools in counties throughout South Carolina, Florida, Virginia, and Alabama, and on voting rights cases throughout. It was his immersion in civil rights and civil liberties that helped forge his abiding commitment to ensure the rights guaranteed in the United States Constitution extend to all Americans, regardless of race, age, ethnicity, sexual orientation, or gender. To his right is Wendy Amangwal-Wark. She is the founder of Inclusion Strategy, a WMBE certified consultancy, where she works with clients that include Fortune 500 companies, government agencies, academic institutions, and nonprofit organizations in working towards including and equal opportunities. She has this work operates in the United States and internationally. Wendy is a member of the training roster for gender equality UN Women and has been a board or committee member of both the Tri-State Diversity Council, SHRM's Diversity and Inclusion Standards Task Force, WTA's Greater New York Chapter on Diversity Committee, and Friends of the San Francisco Commission on the Status of Women. And to her right, we have the Honorable Sharon Burke Clark, a judge and lawyer in Brooklyn. She is a Brooklyn Civil Court judge. She has over 20 years of legal experience and has been a zealous advocate for equal access to justice her entire career. Born as the founder and CEO of Central Brooklyn Legal Services Corporation and currently serves as an arbitrator in Brooklyn Civil Court Small Claims. She has also served as Deputy General Counsel at the New York State Division of Human Rights. So can we give our panel I think the next task is to sort of have you all sort of maybe introduce yourselves a little bit more, and then we can open it up for discussion.
All right.
We can pass the microphone if we need it.
Suddenly a shy group. Amazing. How that gets as you heard, I'm Danny Greenberg. I'll do a little tiny bit more of my background to sort of give you a sense of it all. I actually started on the Lower East Side of Manhattan as a legal services lawyer in the early 1970s. My office was on Delancey and Orchard Street, back at a time when the Lower East Side actually had poor people living there. I like to say that I'm probably the most successful legal services lawyer in history because I always used to say my goal was to eliminate poverty between the Bowery and the East River, from Hudson Street down to Canal Street. There we are. Not quite the way we thought it would be. Very early in being in legal services, I had the enormous pleasure of working with this man who became my boss, actually. Ran the entire MFY program while I was a line lawyer and manager of my own office. And you really have a treat to have Norman here today because he's just an extraordinary civil rights hero in all sorts of ways. I loved what I did. I worked on the Lower East Side. I went to family court every day, housing court every day, welfare rights, back at a time when it was really a very activist place on the Lower East Side. And then I moved up to Boston. I got married and followed my wife up there. And I became the head of clinical programs at Harvard Law School and went from my client is being evicted right now. What can I do do you think you could develop a program maybe in a year and a half? So I understand academia also and the pleasures of that. But I got to meet some really brilliant students and professors there, which was another part of my own education. I came back to New York to run the Legal Aid Society. Legal Aid has about 1,000 lawyers. They are young and old, of every gender, every class, every race. The only thing they have in common is that they hate authority, and I was the authority. Really smart move on my part. I did that for 10 years. I went to NYU for a year as a visitor. And now I'm in a big law firm where I get to use the resources of the firm to do pro bono work. I'm the head of the pro bono program. We did that case in FEMA. We sued New York State in upstate New York over lack of lawyers in court. My firm, without compensation, put in 40,000 hours litigating that case over the last 9 years and got a very nice settlement. So I've had a range of things, and as we talk about ways of thinking about civil rights, one of the things I want you to do is to listen to our stories, not because you're going to be like us. You're not, hopefully someday you'll be in your 70s, but not right now. But more for you to hear what the choices are as you think about a career of being a progressive person. And each of us has our own stories, how we got there, who we are, and we want you to add your story to that great legacy of what Brooklyn College turns out to have people do things beyond only their own self-interest. So I'm just delighted to be here.
I too am very pleased to be here. I can't believe I started 56 years ago. And when I was taking the 2 train from Manhattan, which I used to always take in like third and fourth year at Brooklyn College. I think the first year or two we would go in the afternoon, but then the last 2 years, then I worked for a law firm in Times Square. I would do all my homework on the 2 train going up to Manhattan and coming back. The library was a lot smaller back then. As I was walking up the street, I used to always get my cheeseburger deluxe at 7 o'clock, where there's now a Starbucks. So that in and of itself is a sign of the times. The other thing, just walking around the campus in the rain, 2 things hit me. The casual dress, which is a huge positive, but most important is the racial diversity in the school. When I was here, we were all Caucasian, very few people of color, and to see Brooklyn College the way it is now, I'm really proud of that. I wish the rest of the country would reflect that kind of diversity. We'll get to that in a couple of minutes, probably. I went to New High School in Bensonhurst, then came here in '61. I do say that the public education that I got from Utrecht and Brooklyn College had a lot to do with who I am today, so I'm indebted. I'm not indebted, which is the point I want to make. When I came here, it was free. My parents, God bless them, they never finished high school, let alone college. So, if Brooklyn College didn't exist, I wouldn't be who I am today. But a lot of people in this city would be very happy that happened. Because I usually introduce myself as a civil rights lawyer, aka troublemaker. And part of my theme today is you should cause trouble. When I was here, the freedom rides were beginning. Alabama and Mississippi caught my attention. 63 was a guy from, I think he went to Bronx High School of Science, Mario Savio. He's not alive today. He began the free speech movement at a place that I never knew about called University of California, Berkeley. I got very excited about that, the idea that you could say what you wanted and you wouldn't be punished. I then found out when you say things, you do get punished. And then, when I graduated here, I went to NYU Law School. And in the summer of '66, never being anywhere other than in Brooklyn, or going, quote, to the city on the trains. Always remember, Brooklyn, Queens, what they call the outer boroughs, we weren't the city. On the trains, it would say, to Coney Island, to city, not even to the city. And I still rebel today when people say, I'm going to the city. And they're coming from Brooklyn and Queens. Yes, you are part of the city. That's still another issue as well. And I went as part of a thing called the Law Student Civil Rights Research Council. And our training was in a place called Edwards, Mississippi. And my training, and then I worked in the South with the American Civil Liberties Union. All the things that I was taught at Utrecht and Brooklyn College, it just wasn't true. It wasn't true for African American people in the Deep South. And the Southern Civil Rights Movement really opened my eyes. It was very clear to me. I always wanted to be a lawyer. I wanted to be a lawyer because when I was on the street corner singing doo-wop with folks in Brooklyn, the cops didn't like us. They didn't like us singing doo-wop. I always wondered if we had classical music, would it have been different? Was that kind of a bias based on class? And I always remember when I went to the Allen Free Rock and Roll show, how the cops came in and they would put people up against the wall and pat them down. And so I always knew I wanted to be a lawyer to fight for power. But when I went south, it all changed. We saw the for color only signs at the water fountains, on the bathrooms, in places in the South. Black friends couldn't sit on the first floor. I couldn't go on the balcony. It was all kind of alien to what I was taught. And I remember that night in Mississippi in June '66, which was over 50 years ago, and looking at the stars, making jokes to people about, wow, that looks like a planetarium up there. Well, because in Berkeley we never see the stars, right?
Real planetarium.
Exactly. And that night, I remember it was a very important moment in my life because it occurred to me that what I had been taught was not true. And facing that, I said to myself, beginning of when I started to talk to myself, and I've been doing that for over 50 years, what are you going to do? And it was then that I decided I'm going to make them live by their words. In the words of the Constitution, equal protection under the law for all, not just some. I come here, it was the Southern Civil Rights Movement. It was about black and white together we shall overcome. And now, it's much larger. From the Southern Civil Rights Movement, we'll talk a little about that, because I don't think America has yet had its civil rights movement. And from the civil rights movement, we now can't say black and white together we shall overcome. It's got to be black and brown and red and yellow and white and lavender and gray, green, all the different movements that came out of SCLC, SNCC, CORE, that's what's going on. We were about integration, opening the doors. Today, we're about resist. Today, there is a clear and present danger in America. We have to look up to it. We have to look at the history of what's happened in other places and see how tyrants take over, how the laws are not followed. A very important thing that we have to grapple with is the Constitution and President Trump. Making people in power have to abide by what our laws are. And there's plenty of precedent. And we're going to recall Declaration 17, another sign of change. I brought it's a Declaration 17, which is modeled after the Declaration of Independence from 1776, which is all about King George. This declaration is all about in opposition to the policies and practices of President Trump and his administration. I brought some copies. The difference is, back then I would have had to make 60 copies. Today I can leave a few and tell you to go to declaration17.com and you can look at it yourself. We need to awaken America, and we need to have young people, because we'll talk about it too. Young people made a difference. When the young people went out in Birmingham, they couldn't put everyone in jail. It changed the nature of the civil rights movement. It changed the nature of the opposition and resistance to the people in power in Birmingham. You can play a very important role, whether you know it or not. And when I was here, I didn't know it. Then I learned it. And I'm here today, hopefully, to encourage some, if not many, and even idealistic, all of you, to oppose, to challenge, and when necessary and appropriate, resist. Thank you.
Lucky me, I get to follow that. One of my heroes. So when I started college, I've got two honors, multiple honors being at this table today, but one is I'm the sole non-Brooklyn College alum. I am a CUNY alum, City College. Did my homework on the 7 train and the 2 and 3 train going uptown to 137th Street and Broadway. So I definitely identify longhand in a notebook, of course, pre-laptops. And I was conditioned to do this work from birth. I am my mother's 8th child. We have an interesting story. My father came from Puerto Rico when he was 21 in 1923. My mom was born in Canada in 1928 and was brought to New York as an infant. And we were told lies from day one. We were told that our mother was a WASP, a descendant of the Mayflower, that we were blue bloods, that her father was an attorney, In fact, in reality, she was Irish descent, and her father needed an attorney when he was incarcerated in Rikers Island. So she was very creative. She was creative. She dropped out of high school in the 9th grade to work during the war and lied about her age during World War II and got a job at a factory running a lathe. And there she met a girl named Mary, who was 18, and Puerto Rican, New Yorqueña. And Mary's father, the one who had come from Puerto Rico in 1921, had just been divorced by his first wife, her mother. And Mary introduced Yvonne to her dad, and they got married. So my 42-year-old Puerto Rican father married my 16-year-old WASP wannabe mother. And my father always told us that we were sangre pura, pure blood, Spanish blood, not mixed. And 23andMe proved otherwise. I'm so trendy. We're triracial, trigueñas, which is West African, and they call it Native American, but I'm guessing it's Taino, which are the tribe allegedly disseminated, Puerto Rican tribe. So being these mixed people in this big family, my father had another at least 10 kids somewhere around, but being coming from a big family, mixed family, and I grew up primarily in the Astoria housing projects, with a lot of time at university houses in the High Bridge in the Bronx, near Yankee Stadium. And so these places were in turmoil. When I was 10 in 1968, I watched police cars get flattened by human beings, buses get turned over by human beings. I was standing next to a girlfriend as close as Norma's to me now when she was shot in her spine with her daughter in a stroller right in front of us by a roof sniper. The Black Panthers were walking around with loaded weapons, and the police were terrified and just would not come into the projects where we grew up at the time. Now it's Astoria. And so, so I was kind of indoctrinated into the world that I inhabit now, because kids were coming from, my best friend, they escaped Hungary. And so the kids were coming from the South, kids were coming from Eastern Europe wearing, striped shirts, plaid skirts, brown socks, black shoes, and targets on their back, pick on me. And so I had to defend them, and I had to mediate, and I had to find the commonality for all of us others. What ties us together? How do we, tribeless people, form a tribe? And so that manifested itself, fast forward, going door to door for the ERA as a teenager, campaigning for Herman Badillo, the first Puerto Rican Congress member, campaigning for Bella Abzug, and then coming to work for the City of New York and going into the Equal Employment Opportunity Office and defending employees, investigating complaints and allegations of discrimination and harassment, coming into a system that was corrupt, that was definitely racist and sexist, and saying, we have to hear the stories, thank you, Danny, of everyone, to understand how to find, as Kate said, the love, how to find a way to channel your passion. But I caution you. People would come to me and they would tell me horrible stories of how they had been abused by other humans, and I would take them at face value, and I would respond emotionally. And those 7 years in the trenches, I learned the hard way that the best way I can help people is to learn everything I can and to learn the law. And even though I never became an attorney, I was always multidisciplinary. And it was very important to me to understand the history. How did we come to be so divisive? How did we come to be so competitive? How did we come to desire assimilation and to be like our oppressors, so much so that many of us, like my father, let their self-hatred deny them access? And so I needed to understand the theory behind the work I did. And so City College gave me that grounding and that universal oneness that we need. And went on to Columbia, graduate school and studied history and studied anthropology and sociology and economics and law because I can't help you if I don't know the law. And I can't help you if I don't know the history. I can't help history from repeating itself if we don't know what it is. So I do urge you to be interdisciplinary and channel your passion with knowledge. And be informed and read to the end before you resend that article, that message, that tweet, that text, because too often we have insufficient information to do the hard work of protecting our rights. So I'm thrilled and honored to be here today with my illustrious co-panelists and all of you, and thank you so much.
Hey, good afternoon, everyone.
Good afternoon.
My name is Sharon Glenn Clark, and as you heard, I am a judge in the family court here in Kings County. Before that, I was a judge in criminal court also in Kings here in Brooklyn. I'd like to thank you all for the things that you do, and to my panelists. And I've always said if I can come back again, my next life, I'd like to be an anthropologist, because I really do understand, the background of it. It's really a great discipline. So I started out, I grew up here in Brooklyn, New York. I wasn't born here in Brooklyn, I grew up in Brooklyn. I was born in Guyana. I was raised in Barbados, and I came here at the age of 13 years old. And I felt different. I attended Sheepshead Bay High School. It was one of the first years. Now, people don't know that the public school system here in Brooklyn or here in the city of New York was actually, it was not as integrated as it should have been. And so at a certain point, they started to bus children in from certain parts of Brooklyn into another part to integrate the school system. I was one of the, I think, the second year into Sheepshead Bay High School. So it was a really different experience for me. Being in that type of environment, because I had attended all-black junior high school, and up until the time that I came here, in an environment where everyone looked like me. And so the whole notion of discrimination just never entered my psyche until I came to this country. So I graduated from Sheepshead Bay High School. Was a traumatic experience for me. So I came here to Brooklyn College, and it felt the same type of environment, but I graduated, I made it through. And I knew I wanted to make a difference in the world. I wanted to make a difference for people who look like me. Because I didn't feel that we were heard, that we needed a voice. And so I wanted to be a voice for the unrepresented. I wanted to be a voice for people who I felt were disenfranchised. I attended CUNY Law School, which has the motto, Law in the Service of Human Needs. And again, I was looking for something, a way to place myself. My first year in law school, I attended a seminar like this that was co-hosted by one of my illustrious co-panelists, Norman Siegel and Michael Myers, and it was the New York Civil Rights Coalition. And it was an eye-opener for me as to what it is, where I can really place myself. And I taught for 2 years. This was right after the Rodney King trials. And this was to integrate, to have the students in high school understand the notion that we're all, that there's some commonality amongst us all. And so I taught for 2 years at Flushing High School. Thank you for that experience. Yes, I really appreciate that experience, and because it really gave me an insight as to where I can take my career. After I graduated from CUNY Law School, I started to do criminal defense work because I felt again that so many young African American males were going through the system, and I don't know whether or not they were, they should have been there, and I wanted to give them a voice. I worked for some time doing criminal defense. I did lots of different things, but my goal really was to become a judge. I wanted to be a judge from the time I was 13 years old when I came to this country, because I felt that that was the mechanism really to be able to lend a voice to people who I felt were disenfranchised. Now, I know better, and I know that the legislature really is the one that actually does that, but I also feel that in my limited role that I get an opportunity to make a difference in people's lives on a day-to-day basis, and that is what I did in criminal court. But before I got there, I skipped over. I worked as the Deputy General Counsel for the New York State Division of Human Rights. And in that capacity, I sat on the task force that was created by then Governor Patterson. Shortly after he wasn't elected, shortly after he took office, even during the previous administration, there had been an uptick in hate crimes here across the state of New York. And so Governor Patterson impaneled the task force. It was a hate crime task force. I sat on the immigration subcommittee to deal with immigrants because, like, I'm an immigrant as well, and I wanted to make sure the immigrants' rights, that they were being heard as well. It was an interesting experience because I got an opportunity to see where we were in terms of, we thought that we had a fully integrated society and people were accepted, but I remember the New York State Division of Human Rights dealt with the entire state. And so we would get complaints from upstate, the people who resided upstate who would say that they were not allowed to rent apartments. We also, at the State Division of Human Rights, we handled all the EEOC complaints here in the state of New York. We handled all the housing discrimination, gender equality, you name it, we handled every type of discrimination. So it was really an eye-opening experience for me to see that even here in the state of New York, where this is one of the most diverse states in the union, that people did not have access to homes, education, to jobs, just by virtue of the color of their skin. And so it opened up my eyes, and I felt that hopefully we were able to make an impact. I feel in this current climate that we aren't regressing though, because some of the issues that we addressed, and this was back in 2008, have now become prevalent again when I'm talking about with respect to immigrants here. I was told that ICE has now been coming to the courthouses to pick up people, immigrants. And so I'm feeling that fear, again, not just from Black and brown, from immigrant populations as well. Again, that whole feeling that we felt back in 2008, because shortly after President Obama was elected, the number of hate groups escalated, I think maybe more than tenfold. I don't remember the exact number, but it was an astronomical amount of hate groups that just came into being, and I'm starting to feel that sense here again, not just here in New York City, but across the country. And that's one of the reasons why I want to thank you all for inviting me here today. That's one of the reasons why I decided to participate, because I want to encourage you all that you have a role and you have the opportunity and you have an obligation to make sure that you do what is within your power to do to address these issues. As Mr. Siegel indicated earlier, we have to do something. I cannot be political, so I can't tell you to rise up against our president, but you have an obligation. Choose whatever career you decide to choose. Make sure that you... I'm not telling you that to do it.
You're okay, as long as you didn't say anything.
You have an obligation to make sure that
We'll defend you.
You're out. That's right. I'm going to keep the job, though.
We have a high success rate.
So again, thank you for this opportunity, and I hope that you are able to get some takeaways from this panel. Thank you.
Impactful experience you had when you were working in the criminal department, helping young African Americans and immigrants, if you have it in mind right now?
Okay. At which position? As a judge or when criminal defense?
Criminal defense.
The most impactful experience in criminal defense that you're asking me to go back almost 20 years. I want you to know that. I'm going to look at it globally instead of just one particular experience, because working as a criminal defense attorney representing mostly Black and Latino people who were charged with crimes opened my eyes to the fact that they needed to have a voice. I worked for Legal Aid, and I worked as an intern for Legal Aid in that capacity. And I think Legal Aid does a tremendous job. I don't think that they get the credit that they deserve, even sitting on the bench. I mean, most of the times if a person was unrepresented, Legal Aid would be the organization that I would choose to represent them. For me, it was just mostly that they needed an opportunity to be heard. I think that a lot of people were shocked when they looked up and they saw a black judge or even a black attorney. I remember going down to into Central Brooklyn and looking for my clients at the time, and they were just shocked because it was 20 years ago, so I looked a lot younger as well. And it was like, you're going to represent me, and they felt good because to them they felt that if they had someone who looked like them, they might actually listen to what they had to say, and they might actually zealously represent their interests. And for me, so the most impactful thing for me is that when people saw me, they felt, oh my God, I have a shot. I have a shot in the system because here's someone who's going to listen to my story, who's going to see me as an individual. Does that answer your question?
Yes.
Okay.
I'll take it. I also have a thought. I ran the Legal Aid Society for a while, and one of my lawyers one day told me the following story. He was in court and there were a group of Japanese visitors. They came to the night court to watch arraignments. And after about an hour, one of the people in the delegation came up to him and said, is this the only part in which you arraign people? And he explained that during the day there are a lot of different courtrooms, but at night there was only one courtroom that was open. They went on arraigning people, and then after another half hour, the same Japanese lawyer came up to him and said, are you sure this is the only part? And when he said, it is, and can I ask why you're asking me? And the lawyer said to him, where do they arraign the white people? So everything that you just heard is true, and the criminal justice system is an integral part of keeping people down. And I will say, from the perspective of running an organization that had the largest number of criminal defense people, the question I got asked most often was, how could you defend these people? How could you defend somebody who you know is guilty? How could you put somebody back on the street who is guilty? And I was once on a panel with a large number of prosecutors and judges, all of whom had had criminal defense background, a criminal prosecution background. They were all very proud that they put people in jail. And I knew that when it was my time to talk, I was supposed to say, everybody deserves a lawyer, it's really important, it's part of our system, yada, 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 yada. And instead I said, I am not going to cede the moral high ground to people who put people in jail. The greatest tragedies, the greatest amount of horror ever committed were committed by government in the name of its people. Going back generations to Attila and to Alexander, but in our own time, apartheid, Kosovo, Hitler, all of these were government where people didn't stand up. And the criminal defense lawyer, to answer your question specifically, the criminal defense lawyer who stands there and says, I will not let you put my client in jail. I won't let you take away my client's freedom. I won't let you execute my client. I won't let you take away their children. I won't let you do that because of who they are and because they're poor. And I'm going to interpose my body between you, the government, and these people. That's an extraordinarily moral thing to do. So don't let anybody ever paint us as just people who are doing this technical job and giving prosecutors the upper hand, that somehow they're the ones who are protecting society. Anytime you hear any government leader talking about how they're taking away our civil liberties in order to protect us, take that with not just a grain of salt, take it with a pillar of salt.
To the young woman in the back, if you can go to the internet and look up the name Nick Hillary, Hillary. I'm a civil rights, civil liberties lawyer. I very rarely do criminal defense work, except for protesters. And they're usually charged with disorderly conduct. And you can get a lot of them dismissed. On the Amadou Diallo situation, we negotiated with the DA, and 1,200 people, the charges were dismissed, as long as they're peaceful. Nick Hillary, the Amsterdam News called me. He was man about 42, from Jamaica, was a hero in a place called St. Lawrence County, St. Lawrence University. He, with some of his colleagues from Sheepshead Bay and Tilden. Won the NCAA soccer championship, and it was a huge thing. He was the captain of the team. So he was a hero. In a county that was 96% white. Reminded me of my days in the South. So Nick Hillary, race, class, discrimination. I don't have time to go through the whole thing, but you should look at it, because for any of you thinking about doing something not only helpful for others, but rewarding for yourself, this is a classic example. Interviewed him. He was involved with a Caucasian woman. They broke up. 2 months later, her 12-year-old son was found strangled to death. That night, the local police focused in my opinion, on one individual, Nick Hillary. So they charged him with murder, and I'm Brian Earl Ward. I was an excellent attorney, criminal defense lawyer. And we went out to St. Lawrence County, and the trial took place for about 4 weeks. And Nick was found not guilty. I even cry now. With all the cases I've ever done, for class actions, civil rights, voting cases, equality, discrimination cases, this one was real. Nick had 5 kids. His mother and sister were in the courthouse. When the judge said not guilty, we all cried. We hugged. Until this day, as I tell my grandkids, that was real. That was concrete. Nick Hillary is out now because we put together a legal team, defied the odds, went into this overwhelmingly Caucasian community, and were able to prove that this system sometimes can work. If you work real hard on it. And for any of you who are thinking that that's the kind of life you want to lead, it's still in me. The Nick Hillary case is here. It's not just here, it's here. And when you talk about how it changes your own life, even when I did it when I was 71, 72, it really has changed me in my outlook about the criminal justice system. But more important, as Danny was saying so accurately, we can make a difference. It doesn't have to be the way it is. It can be the way it should be, and the way we're taught, due process, and equal protection of the law for all, not some.
That as well, because I follow that case as well, and one of the outstanding things about that is that the prosecutor usually has unlimited resources, and I was wondering, how did this man get the resources really to defend himself? Because usually in these types of cases, it costs a lot. So I know that you're behind it. Thank you so much. I met Mr. Hillary over the summer.
Oh.
And yes, it's very
Do you want, next question, okay.
Good, we gotta go.
Thank you, Victoria.
Hello everyone. Hello. Thank you so much for coming, and I really enjoyed all your stories and what you guys have gone through to maintain such a society that we have today. One that respects the rule of law and democracy and holds tight to the values of our Constitution. A lot of you spoke about the system, and I kind of want more in-depth explanation, because I feel like it's separated between the individual and the system, right? Because people are in a way the system. I guess I just understand.
Well, you're right. The individuals make up the system. But I've seen so many of colleagues, friends, who were in the civil rights community, and then they get the opportunity to go into government, elected, appointed, and they drink the Kool-Aid. Or even if they don't drink the Kool-Aid, they're co-opted. they begin to rationalize some of the principles that we from the outside continue to argue about free speech, about fairness, about equality, especially equality. And the one thing I always felt that the smarter people are, the more opportunity they have to minimize, rationalize, trivialize the principles of equality, freedom, liberty, and justice. So, I think the challenges are individual cases, but there are also systemic cases. Like on the Nick Hilbert case, it was about an individual who was innocent, but we had to take on the system about DNA, how DNA is used, how it is not accurate. We had to take on the question of jury selection. In a county that's the voir dire, the first day, 150 people, one African American in the whole room, and sure enough, he was knocked off the jury immediately. To take the courage to waive the jury and go before a judge, get criticized, but then when the verdict comes down, not guilty, you're held as a brilliant strategist. But the essence of the question, when we were in the South, and I think the period of the South, there's a new book that's coming out in June called Voices of Civil Rights Lawyers. It's a combination of about 24 of us who went through what we went through in the 60s in the Deep South, our experiences, our cases. It's being put out by the University of Florida. You should get it if you're interested in that period. There's, as Danny is saying, there's enormous stories. I've read a lot of it already. It's even inspiring me at this point. We had to take on the systemic issues of how they exclude blacks and women from the juries in the Deep South. We had to take on the system that kept African Americans from voting and being part of the system. So there's a combination of representing the individual on that individual's grievance or violation of his or her rights. But what I've always thought, if you're going to put the time and effort in, if you can take that individual case and make it into a systemic issue, Casey Hickox, the nurse that Governor Christie put in a quarantine situation 2 years ago when she comes back, no symptoms of Ebola, but the fear and politics. So we represented her, got her out, but then we filed a civil rights action, which is now challenging how states go about quarantining people, especially when you take into consideration not only the conscious, but a new thing that's being developed, which is really good, is implicit bias. Even the people who are good. People are always shocked when I talk about, I'm prejudiced. And people say, how can you do that? Well, what I mean by that, I'm not colorblind. I wish I was colorblind. And all the people who tell me they're colorblind, I don't buy it. On Martin King King's birthday, I hear all these politicians, my classmate, Rudy Giuliani, from he gets up and talks about his hero as Dr. King. Come on, I'm ready to vomit on that. The hypocrisy that's out there. So the issue, as far as I'm concerned, on race, I'm looking at this young woman here. She's an African-American woman. When I look at this older guy over here, okay, I can get away with that. If I didn't know race, I'd be in trouble. And that's unfair too, because I have children equal to her. But when I say him, I say a white guy. The test is, when I'm talking to both of them, do I talk the same thing? And when I interact with both of them, am I interacting the same? And I will confess, it ain't easy. But that's the challenge. If we're really true to being equal and treating people equally, that's the test. It's like free speech, especially what's happening in campuses, Middlebury, Berkeley. Read this thing in the New York Times today on the art section. A wonderful book about a professor from Northwestern who's challenging some of the stuff that's going on in college campuses today. She's a feminist, but she's raising questions about Title IX and what's happening to women. Really important. And in the context of that, we have to struggle internally to be consistent with what we are saying we are about. Because if we can't be consistent, there's no way for us ever to come together. We do have to come together individually and then take on the systemic problems. And the last thing about New York. New York, everybody talks is like this great bastion of liberalism. It is subtle, it is sophisticated, but in some ways it's just as bad as Mississippi and Alabama in the 60s.
It's true.
And to overcome it, it was easier to overcome it in the South because we went to the courts, we used the Constitution to change it. But when I go to college campuses and speak, you see the black table, you see the Latino table, you see the Palestinian table, you see the men's table, and when you talk to people, confront them, people tell them, oh, we like the music together, that's why we stay together. We listen to the same music, or we want to be with our own kind. We need to try to, in a sensitive, intellectual, fair, open-minded way, begin to see this, because the threat that's before us now by Trump is so huge and so unique, at least in my time. I've never seen anything like this, ever. I'm really frightened about where America's going to go. And in the context of that, the left-handed, pink-haired people don't have the right anymore, in my opinion, not to work with the right-handed, green-hand people. If we continue to be separate, we will never be able to overcome. And as Martin told us, we need to confront these issues in order to overcome them. We don't overcome them, in my opinion. America is, we've been brought up to understand what it's about, is radically going to change in the next 3.5 years.
So Norman just touched on about 97 themes. I gasped when he said Rudy Giuliani. When I ran Legal Aid, we interacted with him all the time. My children called him he who must not be named. My older daughter actually told me just a couple of days ago that she was asked her religion, and she said she was raised half Jewish and half hating Rudy Giuliani. I was very proud of her. Anyway, thank you for I also wanted to talk a little bit about the really good question of systemic and individuals, and I want to say two parts about it. The first is, I think all of us were raised that we lived in a fair country. We were raised with what the Constitution was, that people were created equally, and all of the sort of elementary school systems were designed to think and teach us that that was true. And not unlike Norman, when I actually became a lawyer because I never shut up, and I argued with everybody. Everybody would say to me, what are you going to be, a lawyer? And I thought, oh my God, there's a way to make a living doing this. So, and it's held me in good stead for the rest of my life. Never shutting up and always arguing with people. But I also went south as a 10-year-old. And from Brooklyn, we took a drive, and I got on a line in the middle of August to take a drink of water, and I was told that I didn't have to wait on the long line, that I could drink at that other water fountain. And when I realized how unfair that was, and my parents explained to me that in 1955, Washington was still a segregated city, and that I could drink from the white water fountain, not the colored water fountain, I really decided that day to become a civil liberties lawyer. Washington experience was so much fun, seeing all of the Constitution and Declaration of Independence and all of that. And I think my only real change over the years was moving from being a civil liberties lawyer, as Norman really is, and a civil rights lawyer, to in the 60s, looking at economic deprivation and seeing how poverty affected people. And that we weren't such a good society if only we had free speech.
but that really there was something endemic about class and race, that it was not an accident how many people are in jail. It's not an accident who they are. It's not an accident how many people live below the poverty line while so many people live so well. And so my work took a turn, and that's really the second point I want to make for you all. One of the dangers of questioning and asking what should I be doing with my life is to listen to people who may, in very subtle ways, try to tell you that what they're doing is the most important work you could do. That there's even within the world of progressive lawyers a sort of hierarchy. You know, someone will say, I do big test cases. I'm at the ACLU, and those cases affect millions of people, hundreds of thousands of people. And you people who go into criminal court, you know, it's like Band-Aids. You know, you don't really affect very much. Or, you know, I'm a law professor, I shape minds, and that's really the best way and the most important work. Or I do death penalty work in the South, and I'll have one case for years, and that's the most important case. And I realized as I got older that what was really happening was that people were actually telling individual stories. But because they're leftists, they don't know how to use the words, I really love to do this. They have to make it in some global way. But what they're doing is the most important work, right? And at its worst, we fight amongst each other. Oh yeah, you did that one big test case. You spent 9 years doing one case, and when you finally won half of what you wanted, the legislature changed it overnight. That's bullshit what you did. You call me a lying lawyer doing Band-Aid work? You're ridiculous, right? Or I hear people saying to me, I really need to go to rural Alabama and do death penalty work. But I don't even know where rural Alabama is. And I love cities, and do I have to do that, right? So here's what I'm going to urge you to do. I'm going to urge you to make one decision in your life. In the words of the old union organizing song, which side are you on? Which side are you on? Are you on the side, in the words of the National Lawyers Guild, of people or property? Do you think human rights are more important than property rights? Well, if so, you've made the most important decision of your life. You've made a commitment to people over wealth and property. And what I'm going to tell you is after that, it doesn't matter what you do. It's all important. And the real journey, the really interesting, exciting journey is, who are you? Who are you? What's going to get you up in the morning? Do you care about children more than the elderly? Great, do that. Do you want to work with individuals rather than be in a library? Great, do that. Do you want to work with organizations rather than individuals? Great, do that. You want to be a judge? Be a progressive judge. You want to be a civil rights lawyer? Do it all. It's all important, and they work together. Some things need new laws. Something needs a test case. Some things don't need new laws. When Norman and I were on the Lower East Side, it had been illegal for 100 years to throw people out of their homes without going to court. We needed lawyers to go to court every day and enforce it and tell a landlord it's going to cost them more money to throw somebody out illegally than by doing it himself. Okay? So that's sort of what I take. When Norman started and said the civil rights movement gave rise to all the things it did, and all of the multi-organizations. When we got out of law school, you could work for the ACLU, you could work for the NAACP Inc. Fund, and that was about it. There was no Innocence Project, there was no gay and lesbian rights organization, there were no women's organizations, there were no legal services organizations. What it was a handful, and you have enormous opportunity to discover who you are and what you love. And the last thing I'll say about this is, you will spend most of your waking hours at work. It's about the scariest thing I'm going to say today. But you do, right? You wake up in the morning, you eat breakfast, you talk to somebody, you go to work. And most people in the world, most people do minimal amounts, hard work for a few dollars or a few cents to feed themselves and their family. And you are sitting out there and you are amongst the luckiest people in the history of the world. You have indoor plumbing. That's right off the bat. That makes you lucky. But you are the luckiest people. You have a great education from a great school. You could do what you want. And if you are lucky enough to be like the four of us up here, which is that we've spent our entire lives doing things that make the dichotomy between who we are as professionals and who we are as human beings as small as possible. Don't ever let anybody tell you that you sacrifice something by going and making less money than you could elsewhere. We are the luckiest people in the world because we know who we are, we know what we love, and we get to do it every single moment of our lives. And that's my wish for you.
Hey.
A weepy session here, thank you. No, it's, I think, you know, in terms of our good fortune, just to have a seat at the table, all right, so I'm gonna say the name that your children won't say. I worked for Rudy Giuliani, and he was my boss. And the reason he was my boss is that Bella Abzug stood on the steps of City Hall when he was elected and said, I cannot be the head of the Commission on the Status of Women with him as mayor of the city of New York. And I called Ms. Abzug and I said, we're not going to have a seat at the table. Where are you going? This is everything you taught me is antithetical to what you're doing right now. And she said, well then, kid, you go do it. And so sure enough, I wrote a letter to the mayor-elect saying, I didn't send my resume. I said, I've been volunteering at the commission for the past 6 years. I'm an employee, I'm an EO director and an officer of the Department of Transportation, and I am offering to help you with the commission and the needs of women and girls in the city of New York. And I wrote this long letter, and my first husband said, you have to send it express mail overnight, certified. And that's what we did. And sure enough, it went to Mr. Peter Powers, who was Rudy's right hand at the time, and he handed it to a woman who was running the transition teams. And so she thought, this Wendy must be important. And because I sent it certified, and so open my letter, next thing you know, I'm getting a call, and I was invited to be on the transition team. Now, if I didn't have what I call eggs, because women don't have those other things, if I didn't have the eggs to write the letter in the first place, I wouldn't have gotten the opportunity. I had to ask. So I'm saying to you, do ask, do tell. Right? I said I knew the system was broken, and even though this person and I had many, many political differences, I knew if people like me didn't have a seat at the table, we would be silenced. And so I had to send that letter to Mayor-elect Giuliani so that we could be represented at the table. And then I was invited to all of these meetings, and I kid you not, I was the only woman in the room who was not a blue hair with diamonds blinding and furs, and it was quite intimidating. I was quite young, and it was the most educational experience of my life, because I had to find the common denominator of these very wealthy, privileged Republicans in my hometown, where we talk about New York and its diversity, and these people were making decisions about us. About us. And we didn't have a voice. And so Bella Abzug once again was right. And I went and I put myself forward, and I got to be a part of policy decision. So after 7 years of investigating complaints and allegations of discrimination and harassment, I got to be in the big house, is what we called it, and helped to write policy for the city of New York on domestic violence, on sexual harassment, on child abuse. Got to work with teen girls and teen pregnancy, and my world was changed. I got to work with people like my mother, who had no protection when my father beat the hell out of her and raped her. And say, yes, the law is here to protect us, but only if we can get representation. So I speak to you about that. Go and ask questions. Go get internships. You've got this amazing intern program here, internship program. Go work as an intern at the ACLU and Legal Aid and the Puerto Rican Legal Defense Fund and other organizations that defend people like us. And learn from others who have walked a different path from yourself, because that's the other thing. I learned from the women at the commission who were so unlike me, who had parents who went to the Ivy League and lived in very fancy brownstones. And because of those relationships, I saw what was possible in a way I could never have as that kid, little chubby mixed Puerto Rican kid in the projects, right? So ask, get a seat at the table, and learn from others who are unlike yourselves. That's my 2 cents.
I just want to raise one question after this. Let's assume President Trump today contacted all of you and wanted you to come to the White House tomorrow to speak to him, to develop policy with regard to the Muslim ban, with regard to sanctuary cities, etc., etc. Just a show of hands. How many people would go? Anybody in this room would not go? Okay. Interesting. I only might go.
Hi everyone, my name is Ashley. I'm going to do a shameless plug. Yesterday I was elected as an assemblywoman here at Brooklyn College. Some thoughts and suggestions on how we can shift away from social media activism and truly mobilize the youth and get them interested in politics, because there's this stigma that politics is boring and you have to be, I don't know how to explain it. You have to be,
corrupt.
yeah. And I ran on the campaign that politics doesn't have to be boring, and that you don't have to fit a certain mold. A lot of people are asking when I go to important decisions with the big wigs at Brooklyn College, will I take out my scepter ring? And I always tell them I will never change myself to fit this mold. So I was wondering, how do you mobilize a group of young adults who feel like they have to conform, they have to dress in suits, they have to, and I'm not saying there's anything wrong with that, but this idea that we have to be politically, I don't know, we have to look a certain way and act a certain way just because we're involved in activism. And yeah. Yeah.
I'll start that way. So when I got out of law school, my hair was out to here, my beard was down to here. I started at legal services, and the first big case I had was a habeas corpus, a trial over custody, and I totally obsessed about whether I should get a haircut. But really, really obsessed, and with that kind of, it's not fair to my client, maybe I should, maybe I shouldn't. And I ultimately decided, not unlike you, I had to be who I was. I walked into court, and Judge Fine was sitting with a big, bushy beard. It's like in a Henry story. I hear a lot these days about, you said get them away from social media. And my instinct is, don't do that. My instinct is, you are so lucky to have social media as an organizing tool, and that if you're sophisticated about it, it is so much better than anything we had when we were standing by mimeograph machines and breathing in the air and thinking we were going to pass out from the stuff that was on them as we cranked the thing. I think social media is incredibly powerful and important. So that's one part. Did you want to correct me or something?
Oh, yeah, so I guess I didn't explain myself well. There's nothing wrong with social media activism. I think that's great as well. But the fact that people aren't willing to get off of social media and actually do the grassroots campaign.
Okay, so let's stay with that. Look, the day after Trump was elected, there was one of the largest marches in the history of the country. And that's what got the news and doing. And I heard so many people say, it's not enough to march. And of course, on the one hand, that's right. But I'll give you a little history lesson. When we went down to Washington, month after month, year after year in the 60s to try to end the Vietnam War, and had mobilizations at least twice a year, Richard Nixon, who was the president, said after every demonstration, right, you'd be on a bus at 5 in the morning, you'd get home at midnight the next morning, you'd look at each other and say, is the war over? Did we win? did we do this? And the president would say, I wasn't even in the White House, I couldn't care less. None of this made any difference. And years later, when the Watergate tapes came out, we found that the president was actually huddled with his staff and saying, this has gone beyond a couple of hippies. We can't pursue this war anymore. It has to end. And and that's just purely objective. Look it up. You will see that that's what happened. So the first thing is, don't let anybody denigrate being in the streets. If they say it's not enough, that may be right, but it's certainly important. And every time that you are out there, and every time you send something on Facebook and Snapchat and whatever else there is that I don't know or use or understand, every time you do that, it is incredibly, incredibly important. And I think that your willingness to take leadership and your willingness with others around you to try to engage people, it's going to be a process. And don't measure yourself by whether you change it overnight. You'll change it in small ways with individuals. You'll post things, you'll have parties, you'll have events. They'll get bigger and bigger. And in one bizarre way, you're lucky to have the best organizing person in the world around in Donald Trump. Because, my daughters, I referenced them before, they're in their late 20s. Why should they have been in the streets during Barack Obama? They were in the streets over Ferguson and stuff like that. But for the most part, things were going with government doing the right thing. I never lamented that their generation wasn't political, because I understood why they didn't have to be political in that sense. Now you have to. Yes. Now I have to again. Now all of us have to in a very different way. So I would just say to you, stay the course. Just be who you are. They elected you because clearly you're smart, you're a leader, you're charismatic, you're not afraid to stand up and ask a question and interrupt me when I answer the wrong question. It's terrific. It's just totally terrific. So just keep at it and you're going to be doing a great job for people here.
One brief thing, also, in addition, I would say, make it as sexy as possible to get the vote out, because that's critical. Get people registered. The turnout wasn't what we needed it to be. Voter apathy has been a problem in this country since we've been a country. And there's lots of good reasons for that. But I think that's where, the combination of getting the word out with Twitter. The other day I read that African Americans are approximately 12-14%, depending on how they're counting, which I disagree with how they're counting, but it doesn't matter. But of the population versus 24% of Twitter.
Wow.
24% of Twitter users. So that connection and how we find each other, right? And then out in the street, and then what do we do after we get off the bus? Do we all go make sure that we're going door to door with voter registration forms that we mail for the person, because it's still antiquated and we have these papers that we need to mail in? And then not everybody has a stamp in their pocket. So I think that's really a critical action, is getting people to the polls.
I just want to add to that. I'm an elected judge, so I had to run the campaign. Just make sure, as my colleague just indicated, just make it as sexy as possible. But what I had to do is make sure that I created a message really that resonated with the people that I wanted along with me. So you have to make it interesting to them, give them something that, and then once you're elected, hold yourself accountable, or whomever that you're voting for, hold those people accountable.
Yes.
Thank you. My name is Joaquin Rosa. I'm class of 73. I want your input into another area that sort of we tend to skip over when we're in this mode of discussion, which is, what is your experience with private industry, and how have they mobilized their employees in the form of providing training for them? Because every time a law is passed, private industry gets all of their tweeters and puts them up there and sending the law to the law firms that protect them. we are here because we obviously want to make ourselves more marketable in whatever area we go into. So how have you seen the private industry make an impact on the erosion of the civil rights?
Wendy, I think your name was on that question.
How much time do we have? All day. Yeah. So, no, thank you. That's a really important question. So there's a group of us who do this EEO and diversity work who we meet every quarter, and we had our dinner about 6 weeks ago, and one of my colleagues made a brilliant observation. She said, if you think about the major corporations, international corporations, most of them are larger than the largest countries on the planet, right? So think of the influence. I was an employee of a very conservative organization years back, and that was FedEx. And FedEx was proudly non-union with the exception of the pilots. And they would have these quarterly meetings at FedEx. We were told by Fred Smith, the CEO of FedEx, basically they would tell people how to vote. And they would tell people how to invest. And they would tell people all kinds of things that blew my mind. You know, having worked in the public sector for so long in nonprofit, to now have this inside seat. So private sector employers are doing a couple of different things. The self-learning, more aware organizations bringing people like us to help, actually advance equity, because if people are treated fairly and fully heard, they'll stay. They won't quit. But what they're seeing in the private sector is people like us aren't staying, because after they spend all kinds of money recruiting from Harvard, the 3%, people of color, they find they don't fit culturally, and so they leave. And so the training that they tend to provide is to help people to assimilate and acclimate to their corporate culture. And so they dangle a lot of carrots. I will say that the more progressive organizations are understanding that model is not sustainable. And hence they're saying that they're going to be learning from employees in ways that in the past just didn't exist in corporate culture. We're kind of at a tipping point, because I think right now with everything that's going on, not just in the US, but with this kind of fracturing internationally around difference, that corporations are feeling it inside. In fact, what I mean by that is the walls are porous. The same conflict that we're seeing in the streets, we're seeing in the workplace. So I have noticed in my business since the election, the increase in requests for us to come in and do EEO work and discrimination work is steadily, I'm getting requests every week now, where 6 months ago that might be once every 3 months in the workplace. So employers, corporations have to deal with this whether they like it or not. And they tend, unfortunately, to be reactive when there's a mess, clean up, rather than being proactive and inclusive and learning from their employees. I don't know that I directly answered. I don't know that they're as conscious as an entity as we need them to be, but it's happening. Yeah.
So, to build on that, corporations care about money. That's all they care about. They care about their bottom line. And as recently as yesterday, when you have someone like O'Reilly, who suddenly is costing money to Fox instead of making it, it's pressure. Whether he'll be fired, nobody knows. Who knows the end of it? But it's extraordinary that somebody who could bring in that kind of money could find that 30, 35 advertisers are pulling. And they're pulling not because, they woke up before the New York Times article and said, oh, O'Reilly is a racist and a sexist. They woke up because O'Reilly is costing us money. So it's like the question before. If you organize and if you make it in the interests of people, in the human rights area, Google and Verizon and all of them, first they banded together for fair trade against the boycotts against those companies that use children across the sea, and that had some effect, not huge effect, but some effect on it. And now it's happening in the human rights area. There's a man named Michael Posner who's at NYU Business School. Michael was Deputy Undersecretary for Human Rights, and he founded Human Rights First. And he said exactly what Wendy said, which is that corporations are more powerful than most countries when it comes to human rights. So if he could make it in the interest of these companies to not be complicit with government, that's helpful. In the end, companies and corporations are just huge, powerful forces, and nobody on this panel is naive enough to think that it gets turned around easily. But like all organizing, you do it a little bit and a little bit at a time, and some things change, and that's better than when they don't change.
Navaluna Florence from Education. So I'll talk about divorce. Secretary of Education. But a while ago she claimed or thought that universities or professors kind of clone students. You know, we tell them what to read and how to think, and essentially we're turning them against the presidency. I wish that were true. But what is true is that we do have a role in shaping the minds of students. So this question is to all of you, because you've been students. What happens when you learn things in school that are different from what happens in your own home and neighborhood? How do you reconcile the two? Because it's okay, you know, going down the street and saying we should. But what if it's your own family, your own neighborhood that supports that, and yet school has suddenly realized that it's wrong? What then?
How do you reconcile what you learned in school? I taught so education is one of the largest social constructs, you know, in terms of shaping minds. I tell my students, so I used to tell my students, look, you're in this class, and if you're taught something that you don't believe in, understand that we have an obligation as professors. We have an obligation to teach certain material. There's a test at the end of the class. I'm not here to really proselytize. I'm here to teach you, basically, and I taught criminal law. So criminal law, it's set. We have the Constitution, we have laws that I'm teaching. Now I understand that you may not necessarily agree with them. If you don't agree with it, then there are mechanisms in society really to address these issues. As I mentioned before, there's the electorate. We have elected officials. So you don't like the law, you work to change it. I can't think of anything else other than using that so that what's the word I'm looking for? Somebody just mentioned it.
Construct?
Yeah, that construct, thank you. That construct, to move beyond, to really make serious changes. Education, we have to understand that the education that we receive is not created by necessarily the programs are not created by the people who are necessarily progressive. Most of the books come out of Texas. We have to understand that the things that we're taught are not necessarily the truth. I just saw a documentary by Henry Louis Gates talking about great African civilizations. I was never taught any of this information. We were never taught the history of Black or Africans or just the greatness of the African society. And so what we were taught at home was not reconciled with what we were learning, taught in school. And so we have to go outside. You have to develop your own sense of self, understanding that there is a mechanism in place, and there is a reason why this mechanism is in place. I mean, and I don't want to sound like a conspiracy theorist, but there is. I mean, not every single class is there to condition your mind outside of it. You have to understand that a lot of what we are taught in school is created and it's perpetuated to create an outcome, a specific outcome. And as long as you understand that, then you have to be able to bifurcate the way that you look at things. You understand that this educational system is here for a reason, but you are also here as an individual. You have a mind. Use it.
Thank you.
things in school that we agree with, that we think is right. And then you go out in the real world, and there are people who don't practice that.
No.
My answer is you should not be silent. It's contextual. You have to decide who you're facing, what's the context, do you confront them, do you do it more subtly, or do you just say respectfully, I don't agree? We're talking about equality. I can't tell you how many times I'm in a room where someone uses the N-word to describe an African American, uses the S-word to describe Puerto Ricans, the F-word for members of the gay community. A long time ago, I decided I would not sit in that room with that person who says that. It depends on who I'm dealing with, whether I know them or not, whether my strategy is to try to bring them along or just say to them, F you. You have to make that judgment. On the other hand, we taught things also. One nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Well, when I was in the South, in Atlanta, at a basketball game, the Atlanta Hawks were in the 60s. I tried to change their name to the Atlanta Doves. During the Vietnam War period, they were going to run me out of town for that one, since the military complexes are there. I didn't stand for the national anthem. Popcorn was thrown at me, all kinds of abuse, and I had to decide whether I was going to sit my ground. You have to make those individual decisions. My wife right now, when we go to Madison Square Garden, although I now stand, for other reasons, she won't stand. And she gets lots of bad looks, and I respect the fact that she feels very strong, especially these days, and until those words are meaningful, she's not standing to it. So when Colin Kaepernick, the 49ers, did what he did, I'm all for him. And again, when we're taught things that we don't agree with, then by all means you got to get out there and start trying to persuade people that that's wrong. When we're talking about our economic system and that it's fair for everybody, the doors are open for everybody, it's just not fair, it's not right. So you have to then confront people and you have to figure out tactically how do you do it. When I used to do it 20, 30 years ago, I was much more confrontational and much more unsuccessful. And over time, evolving, you begin to see ways to try to move people from point A to point B, so that if they get to point B, they got there on their own, and they'll stay there. If you put a gun to someone's head, I don't like that. Let me erase that. If you do something to someone and force them for the moment to get to point B, once you walk out of the room, they can go back to point A. So you got to try to get them to go there. And right now, for example, I'll up a little, and I did bring some copies of this Declaration of Independence because I am an advocate. We now have people in 40 states in America who signed on to this. We have about 850 people. Go to decoration17.com. I'll leave some of these for here. Hopefully I can come back in May or September and we can have a forum about the Constitution and President Trump, and maybe some of you will sign it and begin movement on college campuses. Where I'm at now is trying to persuade people that some of the things in the Constitution and the Declaration of Independence are true. Not that blacks are 3/5, that Native Americans don't count, that women have the right to vote, which wasn't in the original Constitution, but a lot of the conceptual parts of the Constitution can be used as a roadmap now to challenge Trump and the administration. And yet, I know when I go places and I see people's faces, they think I'm off the wall, they think I'm paranoid. I'm not. But how do you then move people to recognize what I think is a clear and present danger to our system? And sometimes it's very frustrating, very often it's very disappointing, but you gotta keep going I learned it's good to be smart, but probably the most important single ingredient, I believe, when we talk about social justice, is stamina. You have to persevere and do it in a style that you're comfortable with. It's not a 100-yard dash, it's a marathon. And incremental change, I think, is the ultimate goal. But if we keep doing it, just as people helped me be who I am today, I have to give back to your generation. And I have to create, and I'm open, although I do have to get back into New York because I have a client at 4 o'clock that I can meet with on a very controversial issue. But you can call me. If any of you are thinking, especially being pre-law, and want to do civil rights, and as Danny was talking about people law as opposed to property law, I'm there. I want to encourage people because people encouraged me when I was here. And the only thing I ask in return is 40 years later, you do the same to the next generation. That's how the torch for freedom and liberty is continued. Incremental change. But at the same token, I'll repeat it again and again, we're in a moment in American history that we've never been before. Let's wake up, let's organize, and don't let those principles and values be eroded.
I was going to say something, but I can't imagine that there's a better final statement.
Hello. I'm Tiana Day. I'm the pre-law research assistant here at the Magna Career Center. And after hearing everyone give their feedback and how to maneuver, one of the questions that popped up was, how do you manage to keep your spirit intact after years of working and living and experiencing across different industries? You've dealt with other industries, but just how to be motivated, how to remain motivated and to keep your character, solid, after just dealing with certain things,
Norman has it. This is very depressed for him. Very, very depressed.
And I think what's going to happen is I think that's a beautiful question to sort of end on as we go through, because we have a couple people who have to get back to the city for certain things, so we're going to end on that.
Get back to Manhattan. This is a city.
I'm from Wyoming. I learned it coming here. But if you want to stick around and have other questions for the more intimate sort of discussion, we'll allow that too. So with that conclude, we'll sort of end with the soul question. So we would like to see
I love what I do, and I think that's what keeps me motivated and happy and just well-rounded. I think that when you find your passion and you do it every single day, that it will keep motivated and happy and grounded, and even if you're not rich. And so I just wanted to leave one last thing. There's this whole concept of implicit bias as well. I want you to be able to just look it up online if you get an opportunity to do it, because Black people can be prejudiced as well. So understand the whole notion of implicit bias. But as I said, just do what you love. Don't go after the money. Do what you love. I think that several speakers said that earlier today. If you want something so badly that you can taste it, go after it. I remember being here in Brooklyn College, and I could not wait to graduate. I wanted that degree so badly I could taste it. I also wanted to go to Harvard University, which I ended up going to. I wanted it so badly that I could taste it, and I didn't go at the time that I wanted to, but I went eventually. So just follow your dreams, your goals, make sure you write them down always, and you check them every couple of years, every couple of months, and make sure that you're on track with what it is that you want to accomplish. And good luck to you, Tana.
I think there are times when I called it my time in the trenches, when you are hearing one depressing, heartbreaking story after another, and I would go home and I would just weep at night, and just be exhausted by it. My soul was exhausted, but I also get to experience resolution, and I get to help people be the best at who they are and what they do. And when I can work with a team in an organization and they have that moment where the light bulbs go off and they really do get the value of being interdependent and inclusive and understand that none of us are any good when we're segregated and separate. I go home and I'm floating. That's my fuel. And I have enough of that these days to really sustain me and not give up. But I'm very clear about the clients I'll work with. I don't make the big bucks either, but I do choose who I work with. If I don't support your organizational mission, I don't work for big oil, I don't work for lots of companies, because I won't be able to be happy there. So, as Sharon said, pick what you love, be the best you can be at it. Don't compete with anyone else, compete with yourself. Right, be your best self, always. I'm really tired and busy today, but there's nowhere I want to be more important than here with you. All right, so thank you.
I think we all agree you have to find your own things. For me, I listened to the 5 Samples and the Civil Night and the Excellence from my Coney Island baby, since I used to go to Coney Island a lot. And I grew up music, which is always with me. And that reminds me, I'm 16, 17 years old, under the streetlights singing with people, a cappella duo. I'm great. Second, I'll go to the gym. If I can keep making my jump shot, and it goes swish, no matter what happened in that day, even if I lost the case, if I make my jump shot, I'm back tomorrow. And finally, I'll read Parting Waters. I'll read about the Civil Rights Movement, recognize all those great heroes, black and white, who really took on things. And it motivates me. I'll watch a film what I like, Lifetime, the struggles of women to fight back. She always says to me, "You're such a sop, you cry so much." Men can cry.
Oh, yeah.
Men should cry. So those are 3 things that keep me going, and somewhere along the line, it's the kid from Brooklyn who can take on whoever.
When I was a line lawyer for 17 years, I would let myself burn out. I would work incredibly intensely, and then I would take off. I would go travel for a couple of months on the little bit of money I saved, and then I would come back and I would have all the energy to go back again and start all over again. So that's the way I cope at that point. We've all said do what you love, and that's absolutely true. And then the last thing I want to say is, we talk about law, and one can think of it as a conservative notion. You put on a jacket and tie, or a dress, or nice slacks, and you go in and you say, "Yes, Your Honor," and "No." But what we're really doing is we're confronting systems, and there are lots of ways to be lawyers. So I'll just end by saying that there are 3 lawyers' names that you know, but you probably don't know that they were lawyers. Their names were Fidel Castro, Mahatma Gandhi, and Nelson Mandela. So there are lots of ways to be lawyers, including to be revolutionaries.
Yes.
One final thing before we wrap up.
I am honored to be here because I come from a country where people like you cannot sit here and talk and sleep in your bed tonight.
Where you from?
So I'd like us to take a moment and think of the people who are languishing in prisons of conscience, people who have spoken the truth and are paying the price.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
We're much smarter than those countries. We put our civil rights lawyers on the front page and keep them as heroes because that makes the system seem much fairer than in the other countries. We're very smart about that.
Okay, so I want to thank our panelists for coming. But I have been on the verge of tears most of today. I feel like what a way to spend the day before spring break for me.
Yes.
Very inspiring. You can hear my voice crack now. But thank you for doing the work that you do. Thank you for coming here and sharing yourself with our students. And thank you for making yourself available to them.